Rick and Morty 2020 Issue 3. After wasted pages that are off-putting because we don't know what led to this point, where we see panels of alternate universe Ricks losing to smart golden folds, Morty tells Noelle he loves her as there's more fighting between the bad guy and a Rick. There's no appeal to the fight though because we don't see any of the impact when the jerks hit each other. It's explained that the reason Rick is fighting his side is out of spite for them, and eventually the original Golden Fold talks to a version of himself that was put here to do something that he'd never get to do, and they must know that. And I just keep him here for not being good enough at math. He lampshades that fighting has nothing to do with math, and says he's a movie director, and they idiotically got his help when they know they won't appreciate him. Golden Fold lampshades that if he was a rich film guy, he wouldn't be joining the fight. He'd be googling his own name reading articles that praise him even though he should know he'd find criticism too. Somehow this director was left alone with a portal gun, and he trusts him to do his job. He wants to do his pathetically easy job well, and I have to assume the reason he makes a snowman drawing instead is out of boredom. And he instantly gives up on it. Yeah, that's not confusing. If the story could stop being disappointing, that'd be great. Why would I care about any of this? It turns out this robot wants to make a citadel of golden folds. I don't care. He asks the original if the numbers are good in their engine, and somehow a math teacher wanted to do a good job, doesn't know the real answer, and was just busy making drawings on the board out of boredom. This would have been good if he screwed this up on purpose because he didn't approve of these jerks. And that would have made sense because he'd had something against them for not taking him. And he was actually told why they're jerks. A switch is flipped, and somehow the Golden Folds see drawings before an explosion happens. And for no reason they all get warped to another universe with a needlessly bad-looking giant wanting to eat them instead of the exploding machine simply killing them all. The explosion apparently wasn't a real explosion, just a portal expansion. And it was just an unlikely coincidence that they all got sent here. It's hard to enjoy a story if it's hard to follow. Why is science teacher Rick with Morty still? He should explain that he wants to be near Rick's portal gun to get back home because if he gets killed, he'll need to get it in the seconds before it gets broken. He insists on going to fight it because he thinks it'd be a cool way to get killed and jumps into the monster's mouth and swims. He talks underwater without gargling because the writer doesn't care about the story being appealing, hence my complete apathy at this point. Maybe if the story made more sense. The story's boring with him talking to an inexplicable monster and complaining out of nowhere that his wife and grandkid can't stand him for no reason. And he thought a movie was real for no reason. The bad guy doesn't want to admit that he's pathetic because there's a pathetic version of him, who's somehow being portrayed as pathetic when he was called better than the original Rick before. So he says he can do anything and says he can feel regret too, and somehow he does. Why is there so much unappealing art in this issue? The bad guy plans to take a Golden Fold with him in handcuffs, and Mr. Sanchez creates a portal for them all to go home with. Rick thanks him for it, and out of nowhere he says he's sick of his family and would rather rule over this world, even though everyone in it looks awful. It's so satisfying that Rick gets livid with him for not appreciating Diane. I love his dialogue here. He says his entire life is missing her. It really does come out of nowhere that he's not a nice guy. He seemed fine before. Rick's told that his version of Diane is getting into gnomes now. If he was still close with her, he wouldn't care what she was into. Rick turns his arm into an awesome machine gun. Where was that ability earlier? You'd think he'd have been using it at every opportunity to protect Morty. Morty telling him it's not worth it and holding it back only makes sense to me because he's had a hard day and just wants to go home. It's nice of him to ask Morty if he's gonna visit him, so clearly he does still care about him. Morty lampshades said he was nicer when he was with Morty's family, and it's explained that it was easier when he didn't know them. And then he says he's not lonely for anyone who loves him. And out of nowhere, the bad guy finally admits that math without science sucks. Wouldn't he have already known that because he couldn't make inventions without knowing about science too? And Rick's eye didn't succeed because of science. So it's a miracle that he learned this lesson. But I'll appreciate something being forced to happen if it's lighthearted. Like the bad guy being destroyed because of merely feeling regret. Rick says it'll help them build a utopia. But then he shoots the Golden Folds and Noelle with a freeze ray and pushes the ice cube into a portal, when he could have pushed her out of the way. Rick reasons with them that the Golden Folds are too dangerous to keep alive, even though they weren't against him anymore. So he could have just told them to stay away from his planet and then he wouldn't care what they were doing. This is the kind of writing that makes your villain look like a hero, because he seems well-intentioned. Rick traps Morty in a bubble and pulls him back home. Rick reasons that Morty would meet someone new, and he tells Rick off for trapping Noelle too. Rick says he doesn't even know where he portaled all of them because he had it on random. Is that how he decides which universe to visit every week? Rick could avoid Morty running away by erasing his memory of what he did, like he does all the time, and erasing all of his memories of this arc. Morty tells Rick off cathartically and leaves, and Rick regrets what he did and writes a note for Diane saying that her husband's gonna be away for a while being stupid but will always love her and he's sorry and plans to come back to her. He can make a clone of her if he wants to keep seeing her. The robot has annoying rambling, so I like that the bad guy tells him to go hunt for them because he's got a suit of armor. There's no reason Goldenfold would say he's got new friends now. Why does Noelle assume Morty betrayed her when it was Rick who froze her? I'm pretty sure ice isn't soundproof, and even then, she should have seen Morty's upset reaction. I hate the way the monsters around her look. I hope they're actually just gonna give her food to help her. Morty gets spotted on a bus where he's planning to run away from Rick when we all know he'll come back any day now, because he missed him at the end of Season 5. And someone with ridiculous dialogue somehow thinks Rick would let him work for him because Morty's left him. I have to assume he thought he couldn't risk Rick finding out that he got rid of Morty in his sleep to replace him and that he would assume it was him after he met him, because who else would it be that killed him? So that's why he didn't do that years ago. It's realistic that someone as awesome as Rick would have fans on his planet, since the people there weren't told that he's done bad things. We were never told his family told the internet about any of them, and they wouldn't have enough followers on social media to be a real influence anyways, and they know they'd get Rick on their case if people started mistreating him. If nobody knows what Rick is like aside from his family, then he wouldn't know Rick wouldn't put up with the redundant other mad scientists because that means sharing the spotlight, and that he only ventures with the other people because they're family. Why should I be impressed if I already saw the sort of character in IDW Sonic and he wasn't as annoying there? This disappointing story by Alex F. had the original Goldenfold not bother checking the math for the Goldenfold army, which could have been awesome if he was doing that on purpose from spite. But instead it was just confusing because he wanted to do well. And it's also confusing that they all get warped to an awful looking universe even though their machine blew up. It's cool that the teacher Rick saves the day in a creative way by being himself. Even if it's confusing that he can talk without gurgling while floating in liquid. It's like it's not liquid after a certain point and instead pink light with anti-gravity because it's a magical place. So that needed to be explained. Along with why mere regret destroys the bad guy. But I didn't care about the issue, and that's what happens when the artist draws horrible looking characters for no reason and doesn't show the impact when Hack Goldenfold hit. And since this fight doesn't have anything interesting happen, the impact was the only appeal it could have. The beginning being media ruds for no reason created a bad first impression wasting comic space. Rick sending Noelle away was insultingly forced when he knew Morty would disapprove, and he could have pushed her to the side and then portaled away the bad guys. Rick and Morty 2020 Issue 4. There's no reason a car slide highway would have been built, because people would have known it'd result in a huge pileup of cars at the bottom. We didn't need to see that. But since the creator of the highway is a mad scientist, it could make sense that he got people to agree to it if he brainwashed them. Or since that's the one thing Rick never does, implying that that's impossible in the Rick and Morty universe, he could have put nanobots in them and said they'd kill him unless he said yes. For some reason, Rick tells the rat that he loves him just from the slightest amount of prodding to, even though an entire episode was dedicated to showing that it's too hard for him to admit that he loves Morty. I guess it makes sense that he's relying on rats because they're easy to find and they're a lot faster to use than robots that he'd have to make. If he already had the technology and make something sentient right there. And it's sweet that Beth's worried about Morty. And that Rick turns to Summer for replacing him instead of a clone Morty. I don't know what would make a cosmic straw better than a regular straw to the point where he'd go out of his way to look for it. Like the space milkshake thing, it comes off like a parody of him. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. I love that Summer's trying to learn guitar because her phone somehow got dropped in the toilet. And I guess her family's punishing her by not buying her a new one. And she doesn't think having a job would be as fun as learning how to play the guitar. And the portal gun's always with Rick, and she doesn't know where the spare one is to get gold to sell for a new phone. She wouldn't know where the gold is anyways. Summer doesn't trust Rick not to do the same thing to her he did to Morty. I like that she asks him smugly if he was just jealous that he'd find happiness. Rick tries to convince himself he'll be fine without a sidekick out of pride, even though he knows he needs one to yell jokes at. So he could go with a sentient robot. I hate the forced dialogue of this alien. If Rick knows you shouldn't talk to mystical imps while angry, why is he doing it anyways? So because he didn't instantly shoot him, even though he's got experience with that with all of his other enemies, and any alien at his front yard is just going to be there to kill him, he gets grabbed and a whole page is wasted on his awful dialogue just for padding when it'd only take him a second. I have to assume Rick ran out of the energy to summon his machine gun arm again. Otherwise he'd blast him with it. But what kind of awesome mad scientist has it have so little energy that it can't be used more than once? Or doesn't recharge his cybernetics every time he gets home? And the story continues being garbage for not even trying to be logical or entertaining, as I'm just wondering why Fanboy's got good publicity after his car slide screwed up, and why he's impossibly stupid enough to trust Rick to survive eating microplastic chewies, and why anyone would ever eat those, and why he'd think Rick would be dumb enough to. So he's destroyed his credibility because he's not even smart. Again, why isn't it explained that he's brainwashed everybody, and that's why they still like him? The entire audience in front of him would hear what he's saying to his minion and mock him for it. This writer should have no credibility. This is worse logic than most of Ken Penders' stories. It's on the same level as the James Bond-inspired one. Morty would find this guy hiding in his house from the police for manslaughter, not find him because he saw him out in public. He plans to join Vronsky because he's the only other guy than Rick with portal tech out of nowhere. How convenient. Like anyone thinks anyone other than Rick could have that stuff. The only way he'd have any kind of tech like Rick's is if he stole it with drones. I wouldn't expect the Think Giver to give someone else on this planet Rick-like intelligence, because the show never established that there was anyone other than Rick who was as smart as him on his planet. I'm gonna assume Vronsky stole all of his blueprints from Rick so I can stand the story, because this guy's straight out of a fanfiction. It's a lame plot when you have to make excuses for the lazy writing. Morty's told he isn't allowed to talk to Vronsky without writing a job application first because he's just some kid. Morty's taken joyrides with a portal gun in the show before. I have to assume he thought Rick planned to hide the portal gun from him and refused to humor him, especially when he doesn't even know where she is. So that's why he's trying to do this. But then he wrote himself into a corner, so he had to invent a new character who never exists in the show, who had no hint of being around before in the show. It's interesting that Morty's smart enough to have so little confidence in his ability to find Noelle, since nobody knows where she is, to the point where he's been pretending Rick was still with him, so he could figure out what he'd say to reassure him. Morty didn't do this in the show after just a little bit of trying to accomplish something major on his own. He didn't do this after Rick abandoned him near the end of Season 5. So this kind of flanderization is only barely justified by the fact that he knows he's trying an impossible task and can't handle the guilt of giving up either, when he thinks he needs Rick more than ever but is too proud to go to him. Still, it's needlessly depressing. Morty should know he's putting his whole plan at risk by being rude. He gets asked if he can lift 50 pounds and instantly gets a job to scrub a dog in a spacesuit. Why wouldn't Vronsky just make robots do his work instead of having to pay people to do it, who would only be able to help him some of the hours of the day? He could make an automatic robot maker, or program nanobots to put robots together and get all the free workers he needs in no time. This guy's a complete idiot. I guess from the fact that he didn't just ask Rick to let him work for him directly. He thinks he can only get Rick to his side by getting an alien to kidnap him, but he'd know that just take him off. If he knows he'd be too proud to agree to let him be his assistant, it'd be common sense for him to try to do him some big favors first instead of ruining his first impression of him. It's sad when IDW Sonic has competent writing by comparison. There's no reason Glug would think what he's saying to Rick would make a good impression either. If he's supposed to be so good at technology, why didn't he just brainwash him? Or, like I said, put nanobots in him that would blow up if he didn't humor him. Then eventually Noel tells the Think Giver that they'll help him if he helps them get home. He agrees, and somehow he asks them if they can be trusted to abandon hope. Like, that's believable dialogue. It's like the dialogue of a kid's cartoon villain from a writer that's trying too hard to make him sound intimidating. At least with Mike Gallagher's annoying dialogue, it took talent to come up with so many puns. He says that somehow the worship of mortals would get the gods out of the afterlife universe they're trapped in. They're only gods because they're immortal and reliant on worship if they can't even get themselves out of here with a thought. If there's a place made for this purpose, why would the maker of this place ever make it so that there's a way out of here? If someone were to alter it after the fact so that there would be a way out of here, at that point it would just warp everyone out of there. If the next part of this plot progression could be worthy of respect, that'd be great. I have no idea why this giant dog mecha was even made. Why was the spaceship a giant dog that can magically survive in space that has living quarters in it? He'd say, because I can, and it just makes him look stupid for going through all the trouble and money. He just does everything for no reason like the king of lazy characters. Why did he get the idea to rely on this thing instead of getting some other idea? It's so random. Rick's actually opposed to the fact that Glug made his apes geniuses when he insists he doesn't care about anything. So at least he has some compassion. Somehow, every time they say ook, it kills 4 trees. Is there gonna be a new plot hole every few panels? This writing is batshit insane. This writer is suited to a magical fantasy world with a wizard in it instead. But with someone who's making technology, I expect there to be some logic because he's supposed to be restrained by science, and it takes him forever to make his new stuff. And if he's famous and is actually sharing his inventions with the world, then he wouldn't think he can get away with endangering people with them. I can't take this idiot seriously. He's got none of the things that gave Rick his charm, like his love for his family, and no weakness like addiction either. He somehow made goggles that let you look at anyone on the internet that just damage your eyes, and somehow Rick's able to see his own eyes instead. If he already knows that consequence to it, why would he ever give this to him? Why didn't he smash it with a hammer? To use it for spare parts. He says he's rich, and Rick doesn't remember that he said he'd be his mentor in his genius master class, which he only made because he needs to buy Morty back from a non-sentient being when he could obviously just get Morty back himself. He'd have a tracking device in him, like an earlier issue of the Oni comic. If it is a sentient being, why? Rick said to Glug that you know you're a genius if everyone hates or loves you. He wouldn't say that kind of stupid response. Because he made $100 out of every question, he knew he could create a portal to the Seagull and go there with enough money. He couldn't just portal to a mansion and steal jewelry to sell, really, after all his time exploring existence? So Summer wouldn't even need to know where gold is. Why did he have to splash Rick with something unsightly anyways? How is he so incompetent? Rick says he misses Morty, and it's more tedious time wasting until he shows him a portal and says that's not Rick's portal tech exactly, because he has an AI that generates a new universe. That makes even less sense. No, I'm just gonna believe he's lying out of embarrassment and he stole all of Rick's technology and blueprints. He's too stupid to be able to invent things. Eggman has more common sense. We never had the impression that this was possible because Rick didn't do it before. That would be incredibly useful to him, because he could just get anything he wants without having to do research that way. Rick pushes a ridiculously awful looking robot over a railing and tells him off, gets glared at by the armed guards, making it clear that he wouldn't be able to escape, because screw remembering that he's a cyborg. And somehow it's the fact that Glegg profits off his technology that Rick's against. Not that it endangers people. He just thinks he was smart for making money off it. You'd think he'd respect him for being not as lazy as he is. Because he's an unlikable bad character, he has to convince himself that Rick could learn to love him because the truth is too hard on him. He puts him in a jail that has bars made of energy so that a single power outage would free him. Either that or technology used to short them out. And again, you never know what cybernetic Rick could have. What's he thinking? Although the same could apply to regular bars. Because I wouldn't blink if Rick turned out to be able to blast a laser from himself. And the rest of the story is wasted on boredom. In this nonsensical story by Alex F., Morty gets a job for Glegg so he could have a chance of getting his portal tech that he was somehow able to make, because the writer wrote himself into a corner by not having Rick humor Morty like always. So he had to invent a fanfiction OC that kidnaps and rips off Rick with none of the qualities people like, who's impossibly stupid. We really needed to be told why he's so smart from the start. And I'm forced to just assume things for him to make sense. Like assume he's using brainwashing tech to keep himself from being arrested for his car slide slaughter. This guy somehow thinks he could get Rick to hire him by doing things that embarrass and hurt him. I can assume he thought it wouldn't be satisfying to simply brainwash Rick too. The only way he'd succeed. Because he's his idol, so he'd want real praise from him. While I can make assumptions to have this make sense, it's embarrassing when the writer of a series for adults is so lazy that I have to do that. And even then, this character is such a constantly baffling idiot that I can't stand a single panel of him. Maybe the unappealing design doesn't help. And he's got way too much focus. I can forgive a villain having too much focus if he's sympathetic and interesting enough. Like, if you try to make him relatable. The only way the story could be fun is if most of it was him getting beaten up. Rick wouldn't get kidnapped because he'd shoot the alien the second he sees him, because every alien that shows up on Jerry's lawn is there to kill him. The instant Morty was threatened by a guy with power over cookies, Rick instantly lasered him to death. The writer was too lazy to even explain that he had no power left in his cybernetics, and that's why he got kidnapped. And his ray guns that you'd think would be in his lab coat were out of power.